In the rolling hills of Tennessee, where morning mist clings to ancient oak trees and the sound of distant church bells carries across fertile valleys, lies the small farming community of Willow Ridge. Population 890, where everyone knows their neighbor's business, and Sunday dinners bring families together around tables that have served generations. This is the story of Samuel "Sam" Carter, a solitary pig farmer whose world was about to be turned upside down by his most troublesome sow and a discovery that would shake the very foundations of their quiet mountain community. Hey everyone! Before we dive into this incredible story, drop a comment below and let us know which city you're watching from. We love hearing from our viewers around the world. Now, let's uncover what a stubborn pig found beneath an old tree that changed everything for an entire Tennessee village. The first light of dawn crept through the Tennessee mountains as Sam Carter stepped onto the wraparound porch of his weathered farmhouse. At 58, Sam moved with the careful gait of a man whose back had endured decades of farm work. His wife Linda had passed 3 years ago, leaving him alone with 200 acres, a modest herd of cattle, and 12 Hampshire pigs that provided most of his income through the regional meat market. The October morning carried the crisp scent of autumn leaves and wood smoke from distant chimneys. Sam's property sat at the end of a gravel road, bordered by dense forest on 2 sides, and pasture land that stretched toward the neighboring Hendricks farm. It was isolation that suited him just fine. He'd grown tired of small-town gossip and preferred the honest company of his animals. As he made his way toward the pig enclosure, coffee mug in hand, Sam noticed something that made him pause. Gertrude, his largest Hampshire sow and undoubtedly the most stubborn animal he'd ever owned, was not with the other pigs near their shelter. Instead, she was at the far corner of the enclosure, digging frantically beneath an enormous white oak tree that had stood on the property longer than anyone could remember. "What are you up to now, Gertie?" Sam muttered, setting down his coffee on a fence post. The sow had always been headstrong, but this behavior was unusual even for her. She was completely focused on her digging, ignoring the morning feed that had already drawn the other pigs to their trough. Sam climbed over the fence and approached the tree. Gertrude barely acknowledged his presence, continuing to root in the earth with single-minded determination. The soil around the massive oak was soft from recent rains, and the pig had already created a substantial depression in the ground. "Come on, girl, leave that alone," Sam said, trying to guide her toward the feed, but Gertrude resisted, something she'd never done before. She was normally food-motivated above all else, yet here she was, ignoring breakfast to pursue whatever lay beneath the tree. Over the next several days, Gertrude's obsession with the oak tree intensified. Every morning, Sam would find her there, digging with renewed energy. The hole grew deeper and wider, despite Sam's attempts to fill it in and redirect her attention. By Thursday, he was genuinely concerned about her behavior. That afternoon, Roy Hendricks, Sam's neighbor, and the closest thing he had to a friend since Linda's death, stopped by to borrow a hay rake. Roy was a cheerful man in his 60s who ran a dairy operation with his 2 sons. He'd been trying to get Sam more involved in community activities with limited success. "Sam, I was driving past your place this morning and saw that sow of yours still digging under that old tree," Roy said, leaning against his pickup truck. "Martha mentioned she's been at it for near a week now. That's not normal pig behavior." "Tell me about it," Sam replied, wiping his hands on a worn towel. "I've tried everything. Moved her feed, penned her separately, even tried blocking access to that corner. She just finds a way back. It's like she's determined to dig something up." Roy scratched his graying beard thoughtfully. "You know, my granddaddy used to tell stories about that tree. Said it was old when his granddaddy was young. Maybe there's something down there worth finding." Sam had heard similar stories from Linda's family, who had deep roots in the area. The oak tree was a landmark that appeared in local folklore and old property surveys. Some claimed it was over 300 years old, making it one of the oldest living things in the county. That evening, Sam decided to take a closer look at what Gertrude was so determined to uncover. Armed with a flashlight and a small spade, he knelt beside the hole the sow had excavated. The depression was now nearly 3 feet deep and just as wide. As he examined the disturbed earth, his flashlight beam caught something that made his heart skip. There, partially exposed in the dark soil, was what appeared to be the corner of a metal container. The surface was heavily corroded, but it was clearly man-made and had been buried deliberately. Sam's hands trembled slightly as he cleared away more dirt, revealing what looked like an old military ammunition box. "I'll be damned," he whispered to himself. Gertrude, as if sensing his excitement, grunted approvingly from where she watched nearby. The next morning brought unseasonably warm weather for mid-October. Sam was up before sunrise, eager to continue his investigation, but also apprehensive about what he might find. Before disturbing the buried object further, he decided to seek advice from someone with more experience in such matters. Pastor Michael Reynolds of the Willow Ridge Community Church had lived in the area his entire life and served as an informal historian for the community. A thoughtful man in his early 50s, with graying temples and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, Pastor Reynolds often helped residents research property histories and family genealogies. When Sam called, explaining his discovery, Pastor Reynolds agreed to come out that afternoon. "Sam, you might have stumbled onto something historically significant," he said. "During the Civil War, this area saw considerable activity. Families often buried valuables to protect them from raiders." That afternoon, Pastor Reynolds arrived with his wife Ellen, a retired schoolteacher who had spent decades collecting local history. Ellen was a meticulous woman with silver hair and sharp eyes who missed very little. She'd been documenting the stories of old families in the region for years, hoping to preserve their heritage for future generations. "Sam, that tree has been a landmark for generations," Ellen said as they examined Gertrude's excavation site. "According to county records, this property changed hands several times during the 1860s. There was a family named Patterson who owned it during the war years. They were known to be Union sympathizers in a predominantly Confederate area." Pastor Reynolds knelt beside the partially exposed container. "Ellen's right. If this dates to the Civil War period, it could contain anything: family heirlooms, important documents, or even military information." As they discussed the possibilities, Gertrude returned to her digging with renewed vigor, as if she understood the importance of their conversation. The intelligent gleam in her eyes suggested she knew she had uncovered something significant. "You know what's strange?" Sam mused, watching his determined sow. "Gertrude's never shown this kind of behavior before. It's almost like she was drawn to this specific spot for a reason." Ellen nodded thoughtfully. "Animals often have senses we don't fully understand. Perhaps she detected something, a scent, a subtle change in the soil that led her here." That evening, Sam stood alone beside the oak tree as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Gertrude had finally returned to the pig shelter for the night, but her day's work had revealed more of the buried container. Tomorrow, Sam knew he would have to make a decision about whether to fully excavate what his pig had discovered. The quiet of the Tennessee evening was broken only by the distant sound of cattle lowing and the rustle of leaves in the ancient oak above him. Sam felt a mixture of excitement and uncertainty about what lay ahead. Linda had always said that life had a way of bringing unexpected changes when you least expected them. As he looked down at the partially buried box, Sam realized she might have been more right than she ever knew. Unearthing the past. The decision to fully excavate the buried container wasn't one Sam made lightly. After a sleepless night, wrestling with questions about property rights, historical significance, and legal implications, he decided to contact the proper authorities before proceeding. His first call was to Sheriff Janet Morrison, who had been serving Willow Ridge County for over 15 years. Sheriff Morrison was a no-nonsense woman in her early 40s, who had earned the respect of the community through fair dealing and genuine concern for her constituents. She'd grown up in the area and understood both the legal complexities and cultural sensitivities surrounding historical discoveries. "Sam, you did the right thing calling me first," Sheriff Morrison said when she arrived at the farm Friday morning. "If this is what we think it might be, we need to document everything properly. I've already contacted the State Archaeological Office, and they're sending someone out." Dr. Catherine Mills from the Tennessee Division of Archaeology arrived that afternoon, along with her assistant, a young graduate student named David Park, who was working on his thesis about Civil War-era artifacts in East Tennessee. Dr. Mills was a woman in her late 30s with short brown hair and the methodical manner of someone accustomed to painstaking research. "Mr. Carter, discoveries like this are more common than you might think," Dr. Mills explained as she examined the site. "During the Civil War, families throughout Tennessee buried valuables, documents, and other precious items to protect them from both armies. What's unusual is how your pig managed to locate it so precisely." David, who was setting up photographic equipment to document the excavation, looked up from his work. "Sir, the depth and location suggest this was buried deliberately by someone familiar with the property. They chose the oak tree as a landmark, something that would still be here when they returned. The excavation took most of the afternoon." Dr. Mills worked with archaeological precision, carefully removing soil and documenting each layer. Gertrude watched the proceedings with obvious interest, grunting approvingly whenever they made progress. She seemed to understand that her discovery was being treated with the seriousness it deserved. When they finally freed the metal container from the earth, everyone present fell silent. The box was larger than they'd initially thought, approximately 18 inches long, 12 inches wide, and 8 inches deep. Despite heavy corrosion, they could make out what appeared to be initials carved into the lid. J.P. 1863. "J.P.?" Ellen Reynolds repeated thoughtfully. She had arrived to observe the excavation, bringing with her a collection of local historical documents. "That could be Jacob Patterson. According to my research, he owned this property during the Civil War. He was known to be a Union sympathizer who helped operate part of the Underground Railroad through this area." Dr. Mills nodded. "That would make sense. Union sympathizers in Confederate territory often had to hide evidence of their activities. If Jacob Patterson was involved in helping escaped slaves reach the North, he would have had good reason to bury sensitive materials." The decision about whether to open the container immediately became a subject of debate. Dr. Mills wanted to take it to a controlled laboratory environment where the contents could be preserved properly. But Sam, as the property owner, was understandably eager to learn what Gertrude had discovered. Sheriff Morrison provided a practical solution. "Why don't we open it here with proper documentation, but have Dr. Mills's equipment ready to preserve whatever we find? That way Sam gets to see what's on his property, but we don't risk damaging anything historically significant." Then, as word of the discovery spread through Willow Ridge, more community members began arriving at Sam's farm. Among them was Virginia Patterson Webb, an elderly woman in her 80s who claimed to be a descendant of the Patterson family that had once owned the property. Virginia was a spry woman with white hair and keen blue eyes who had spent her retirement years researching her family genealogy. She arrived carrying a worn leather portfolio filled with family documents, photographs, and genealogical charts. "Mr. Carter, I believe that container belonged to my great-great-grandfather, Jacob Patterson," Virginia said with quiet excitement. "My family has been looking for evidence of his activities during the war for over a century. We always suspected he was more involved in the Underground Railroad than anyone realized, but we never found proof." The revelation that Jacob Patterson might have been involved in helping escaped slaves added significant historical importance to the discovery. Dr. Mills explained that documentation of Underground Railroad activities in East Tennessee was relatively rare, making any authentic artifacts extremely valuable for understanding this crucial period in American history. As the sun began to set, Casting long shadows across the farm, the group gathered around a makeshift table where Dr. Mills had prepared to open the container. She worked slowly, using specialized tools to carefully pry open the corroded lid. The metal resisted at first, then gave way with a grinding sound that seemed to echo across the quiet farmyard. Inside, wrapped in what appeared to be oiled cloth that had somehow survived the decades underground, were several items that took everyone's breath away. The first was a leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age, but remarkably well preserved. Beside it was a small wooden box containing what appeared to be jewelry, coins, and other personal items. But it was the third item that caused the greatest stir. A collection of letters tied with a faded ribbon, and beneath them what appeared to be a detailed map of the local area with various locations marked in faded ink. Virginia Patterson Webb gasped when she saw the journal. "That's Jacob's handwriting," she whispered, recognizing the distinctive script from family letters she'd preserved. "This is his personal journal from the war years." Dr. Mills carefully opened the journal to a random page, reading aloud in the fading light. October 15th, 1863. Helped 3 souls cross the river last night. Martha worries we'll be discovered, but I cannot turn away those seeking freedom. The Lord tests us in many ways. The implications of the discovery were staggering. Not only had Gertrude uncovered a family treasure, but she had potentially revealed documentary evidence of Underground Railroad activities that could rewrite the local history of Willow Ridge. As darkness fell and the group prepared to secure the artifacts for the night, Sam looked over at Gertrude, who was contentedly rooting in a nearby patch of dirt. His stubborn sow had uncovered not just buried objects, but buried history that connected their small Tennessee community to one of the most important chapters in American history. "How do you suppose she knew?" Sam asked, more to himself than to anyone else. Dr. Mills, who was carefully repacking the artifacts, looked up thoughtfully. "Animals often have abilities we don't fully understand, Mr. Carter. But in this case, I think your pig may have simply been following her instincts and led us to one of the most significant historical discoveries this county has seen in decades." Secrets of the Underground Railroad. News of the discovery at Sam's farm spread beyond Willow Ridge faster than anyone expected. By Monday morning, reporters from Knoxville and Nashville had arrived, along with representatives from the Tennessee Historical Society and the National Park Service. What had started as a pig's peculiar digging behavior had evolved into a story of national historical significance. Dr. Amanda Foster, from the University of Tennessee's History Department, arrived with a team of Civil War specialists. A distinguished woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair and an authoritative manner, Dr. Foster had written extensively about the Underground Railroad in Tennessee and immediately recognized the importance of Sam's discovery. "Mr. Carter, these documents could provide crucial evidence about Underground Railroad operations in East Tennessee," Dr. Foster explained as she examined Jacob Patterson's journal in Sam's living room. "We know the network existed throughout this region, but documentation is extremely rare. Most participants destroyed records to protect themselves and the people they helped." The journal, which Dr. Mills was carefully transcribing, revealed a complex network of safe houses, river crossings, and communication methods that had operated right under the noses of Confederate authorities. Jacob Patterson had been more than just a Union sympathizer. He had been a key coordinator for Underground Railroad activities in the region. One entry, dated November 1863, was particularly revealing. "Received word from Thomas upstream that a group of 7 will arrive Tuesday night. Have arranged with the Hendricks family to provide temporary shelter in their root cellar. The old oak will serve as the signal tree. If safe to proceed, I will tie a white cloth to the 3rd branch." Sam felt a chill when he realized that the old oak referred to in the journal was the same tree under which Gertrude had been digging. The Patterson farm had been a crucial stop on the Underground Railroad, and the tree had served as a communication point for freedom seekers and their helpers. Roy Hendricks was stunned to learn that his family had been involved in the Underground Railroad network. "My family never talked about the war years," he told Sam and Dr. Foster. "I always wondered why Granddad was so secretive about what his grandfather did during the Civil War. Now I understand they were protecting escaped slaves." The discovery attracted the attention of Marcus Williams, a documentary filmmaker from Atlanta who specialized in African American history. Marcus was a passionate advocate for preserving Underground Railroad sites and had produced several acclaimed films about the network's operations throughout the South. "This is exactly the kind of documentation we need to tell the complete story of the Underground Railroad," Marcus explained to Sam during their first meeting. "Would you consider allowing us to create a documentary about your discovery? It could help preserve this history for future generations." But the increased attention also brought unwanted complications. Some community members were uncomfortable with the national spotlight being focused on Willow Ridge, particularly regarding the area's role in helping escaped slaves. While most residents supported preserving the history, a vocal minority worried about how the discovery might affect property values and tourism. James Crawford, a local businessman who owned several properties in town, voiced these concerns at a hastily organized town meeting. "I'm not saying we shouldn't preserve history," Crawford said, "but we need to think about the practical implications. Are we going to have our quiet town overrun with tourists and curiosity seekers?" Pastor Reynolds, who had been studying the journal entries, offered a different perspective. "This discovery gives us an opportunity to honor the courage of our ancestors, people who risked everything to help others achieve freedom. That's a legacy we should be proud of, not hide from." The debate over how to handle the discovery was complicated by the realization that other properties in the area might contain similar buried materials. Dr. Foster's analysis of the journal suggested that the Underground Railroad network in Willow Ridge had been more extensive than anyone imagined, potentially involving a dozen or more local families. Virginia Patterson Webb, who had become something of a local celebrity due to her family connection, strongly supported making the discovery public. "My great-great-grandfather risked his life to help people seeking freedom," she said during the town meeting. "The least we can do is make sure his story is told." The artifacts themselves continued to reveal new information as experts studied them. The map found in the container showed detailed routes through the Tennessee mountains, with coded symbols indicating safe houses, danger areas, and river crossings. Some of the locations marked on the map corresponded to properties still owned by descendants of the original families. Dr. Mills made another significant discovery when she examined the wooden box found with the journal. Hidden beneath the jewelry and coins was a collection of freedom papers, forged documents that would have helped escaped slaves travel north without being questioned by authorities. "These papers are incredibly sophisticated forgeries," Dr. Mills explained. "Creating documents this convincing would have required considerable skill and resources." It suggests the local Underground Railroad network was highly organized and well-funded. The Freedom Papers also provided names and descriptions of people who had passed through the Willow Ridge network. Dr. Foster was working with genealogists and historians to try to trace what had happened to these individuals, hoping to connect their stories with families who might still be searching for information about their ancestors. One particularly poignant discovery was a letter from a woman named Sarah, thanking Jacob Patterson for his help in reaching freedom. "You have given me and my children a chance at a new life," the letter read. "We will never forget your kindness, and I pray that God will bless you for your courage." As the investigation continued, Sam found himself at the center of discussions about how to properly honor the historical significance of his property. The National Park Service had expressed interest in potentially designating the farm as a historic site, which would preserve it for future generations, but also restrict Sam's ability to continue farming the land. Through it all, Gertrude seemed to sense that she had accomplished something important. The sow had returned to her normal routine, but Sam noticed she would occasionally visit the oak tree, as if checking on the site of her discovery. Sometimes she would stand there quietly, almost as if she were paying respects to the history she had uncovered. "You know what's remarkable about all this? Sam said to Pastor Reynolds one evening as they sat on the farmhouse porch watching the sunset. "A pig led us to discover the courage of people who lived here 160 years ago. It makes you wonder what else is buried out there, just waiting to be found." Pastor Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe that's the point, Sam. Sometimes the most important stories are the ones that are hidden, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. Your Gertrude just happened to be the one chosen to uncover this particular story." As night fell over the Tennessee mountains, Sam reflected on how dramatically his quiet life had changed. He was no longer just a pig farmer living in isolation. He was the keeper of a piece of American history that would help people understand the courage and sacrifice of those who had fought for freedom in their own backyard. Legacy of courage. The months following Gertrude's discovery transformed not just Sam's life, but the entire community of Willow Ridge. What began as a pig's persistent digging had evolved into a movement to preserve and share a crucial piece of American history. The town found itself grappling with questions about identity, heritage, and responsibility that no one had anticipated. Dr. Rachel Thompson, a specialist in African American genealogy from Fisk University in Nashville, arrived in January to help trace the descendants of people who had passed through the Willow Ridge Underground Railroad network. A meticulous researcher, with a passion for reconnecting families with their history, Dr. Thompson brought hope to many people who had spent years searching for information about their ancestors. "The documentation you've uncovered is extraordinary," Dr. Thompson told Sam during one of her visits. "Most Underground Railroad records were destroyed or lost, but Jacob Patterson's journal provides names, dates, and detailed accounts that we can use to help people trace their family histories." One of the most emotional moments came when Dr. Thompson was able to connect Sarah's letter, the one found in the buried container, with her living descendants. Maria Jackson, a teacher from Detroit, traveled to Willow Ridge after learning that her great-great-grandmother had passed through the area in 1863. "I've been searching for information about my family's journey north for 20 years, Maria said, tears in her eyes as she held copies of the documents that mentioned her ancestor. To know that she was helped by people in this community, that she was safe here, even if it was only for a few days, it means everything to me. The emotional reunions and historical revelations convinced the community that preserving the story was the right thing to do. Working with the Tennessee Historical Society, they developed plans for the Willow Ridge Underground Railroad Heritage Site, which would include Sam's farm, the historic oak tree, and several other properties that had been identified through Jacob Patterson's records. Sam faced the most difficult decision of his life when the National Park Service offered to purchase his property for preservation as a historic site. The offer was generous, enough to allow him to buy another farm and continue his agricultural lifestyle. But the land had been his home for 30 years, and leaving felt like abandoning Linda's memory. It was Virginia Patterson Webb who helped him find a solution. "Sam, what if we could find a way to honor the history while allowing you to stay on the land?" she suggested. Jacob Patterson was a farmer too. Maybe the best way to preserve his legacy is to show how farming families have always been part of this community's story. The compromise that emerged was innovative and practical. Sam would donate a conservation easement on 50 acres of his property, including the area around the historic oak tree, while retaining ownership and the right to continue farming the remaining 150 acres. The preserved area would become a heritage site and educational center, while Sam's ongoing agricultural operations would demonstrate the continuity of farming in the region. The heritage site opened to the public in September, almost exactly 1 year after Gertrude's initial discovery. The opening ceremony drew over 500 visitors, including descendants of Underground Railroad participants, historians, educators, and curious tourists from across the Southeast. Marcus Williams had completed his documentary about the discovery, which premiered at the opening ceremony. The film, titled The Pig That Changed History, told not just the story of Gertrude's find, but the broader narrative of courage and community that had emerged from it. This story reminds us that history isn't just something that happened long ago, Marcus said during the ceremony. It's all around us, sometimes buried just beneath our feet, waiting to be discovered by anyone curious enough to keep digging. Pastor Reynolds delivered the keynote address at the opening, reflecting on what the discovery had meant for the community. "A year ago, we were just a quiet farming town in the Tennessee mountains," he said. "Today, we're the keepers of a story that connects us to one of the most important chapters in American history. That's a responsibility we don't take lightly." The heritage site included an interpretive center housed in a restored barn on Sam's property, walking trails that connected various Underground Railroad locations, and of course, the famous oak tree where Gertrude had made her discovery. A bronze plaque at the base of the tree honored both the courage of those who had sought freedom and the determination of a pig who had refused to give up digging. Gertrude herself had become something of a celebrity. The Tennessee Department of Agriculture recognized her with a special award for outstanding service to historical preservation, and she had her own section in the Interpretive Center, complete with photos and a detailed account of her discovery. But perhaps more importantly, Gertrude's find had sparked a broader interest in local history throughout East Tennessee. Schools began bringing students to learn about the Underground Railroad. Other communities started researching their own connections to the Freedom Network, and several additional historical sites were discovered and preserved. Sam found that his life had been enriched rather than disrupted by the changes. The heritage site brought a steady stream of visitors who were genuinely interested in learning about the area's history, and many of them also purchased products from his farm. He'd started a small side business selling heritage pork and locally grown vegetables, which helped supplement his income. More significantly, Sam had found a new sense of purpose. He regularly spoke to school groups and visitors about the discovery, sharing not just the historical facts, but the personal journey that had led him from isolation to community engagement. Linda would have been proud, he often thought, of how he'd emerged from his grief to help preserve something important for future generations. Dr. Foster's research had identified over 20 families in the region with connections to Underground Railroad activities, leading to the creation of the East Tennessee Freedom Trail, a driving tour that connected multiple historical sites. Willow Ridge had become the anchor point for this larger preservation effort. 1 year after the opening of the heritage site, Sam stood beneath the oak tree on a crisp October morning, much like the day when Gertrude had first started digging. The tree was now protected by a small fence and surrounded by interpretive signs, but it remained a living symbol of the courage and determination that had characterized both the Underground Railroad participants and one very persistent pig. Gertrude approached the fence, as she did most mornings, and seemed to survey her domain with satisfaction. At 4 years old, she was now the undisputed queen of the heritage site, receiving more attention and admiration than any pig in Tennessee history. "You know what you did, don't you, girl?" Sam said softly, scratching behind her ears. "You helped us understand that courage isn't always about grand gestures. Sometimes it's about refusing to give up, even when everyone else thinks you're just being stubborn." The success of the Willow Ridge Underground Railroad heritage site had demonstrated that small communities could play significant roles in preserving American history. More importantly, it had shown how ordinary people, and apparently ordinary pigs, could uncover extraordinary stories that had been waiting decades to be told. As visitors began arriving for the day's first tour, Sam reflected on how profoundly his life had changed. He was still a farmer, still working the land he loved, but now he was also a storyteller, helping people understand the courage of those who had come before. The loneliness that had characterized his life after Linda's death had been replaced by a sense of connection to his community, to history, and to the ongoing story of people helping each other in times of need. Gertrude's discovery had proven that the most important stories are often hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone curious enough to keep looking, determined enough to keep digging, and brave enough to share what they find with the world. The legacy of the Underground Railroad lived on, not just in museums and history books, but in the daily life of a small Tennessee farming community that had learned to celebrate both its heritage and its future. And at the center of it all was an oak tree, a bronze plaque, and the memory of one very special pig who had refused to stop digging until she uncovered the truth. What an incredible journey this has been. From a stubborn pig's determination to dig under an old oak tree to the discovery of a crucial piece of Underground Railroad history that transformed an entire community. This story reminds us that history is all around us, sometimes waiting just beneath our feet for someone curious enough to uncover it. What did you think of Gertrude's amazing discovery and how it brought a community together to preserve their heritage? Drop a comment below and let us know which city you're watching from. We love connecting with viewers from all around the world. If you enjoyed this story of courage, determination, and unexpected heroes, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales that will open your eyes to the extraordinary stories hiding in ordinary places. Until next time, keep digging for the truth. You never know what amazing discoveries are waiting to be found.